Hello friends, in this video lecture we are going to look at the rise of the Islamic Caliphates, which are empires that are rooted in the Islamic tradition. So when we use the term caliphate, we are referring to an Islamic state under the leadership of a caliph, who is a person who is the political and religious successor to the Prophet Muhammad. And the idea is that they represent and lead the entire Muslim world. So hopefully we remember that when Muhammad was still alive and leading the Islamic community, that the early Muslims were attacked by the Arab elite, and they went into hiding in the city of Medina. In the city of Medina, they began to establish the five pillars, as well as to create a community and a government that slowly began to expand throughout what we know as Saudi Arabia today, and over time continues to grow. So this is why Islam quickly becomes not just a religion, but a political entity. After the Islamic schism, the Sunni Arabs consolidated power. We'll remember that it's the Sunnis who won more power during that split between the Sunni and the Shia. And they began to consolidate their wealth and their militaries, and then began to conquer neighboring territories. So there are two major caliphates that we're about to study. The Umayyad, who take over and expand initially and last from 661 to 750. But we'll see that as much as they take over a lot of territory, they were not very popular, and so they don't have that huge of an effect on conversion to Islam. Instead, where we see mass conversion is during the Abbasid or Abbasid Empire, which conquers the Umayyad and reigned from 750 to 1258. They established what's called a Pax Islamica, or a period of Islamic peace, and reign over what's considered an Islamic golden age. It's a far more peaceful empire, although initially they also conquered territory, and there are more waves of conversion to Islam during the Abbasid time period. Both the caliphates politically, economically, and culturally unite the regions of North Africa, the Mediterranean, and the Middle East and Central Asia. And culturally, as I said, they help not only to spread religion, but the Arabic language and a lot of these big achievements. Please excuse my typos. So this is looking at the expansion over time. So initially, hopefully remember that the first Muslims lived first in Mecca and then Medina, and then kind of between these two areas. During the life of Muhammad, they began to expand into what is this whole pink region. And then during the initial expansion of the caliphs, the Umayyad caliphs, they take over the orange area in what's kind of the classic Middle East and into modern-day Iran and northern Africa. And then the Umayyads continue to expand further into North Africa, over into Europe, as well into parts of Asia. So it is a very rapid expansion. And we'll chat more about that. So the Umayyads, as I said, are the first widespread caliphate, lasting for less than 100 years. And they expand by force, right? So they do use their military might to expand across the Middle East, North Africa, and Asia. They establish a capital in Damascus. The original capital was in Medina, but then they moved that to a more central location. So I'm only going to highlight a couple battles because military history is not the focus of this course, but there is a very important battle that happens between the Umayyad and these Frankish kings in Europe. So when the Umayyads were seeking to go further into Europe, they were pushing into what is modern-day France, but they were stopped by a European power at what is called the Battle of Tours in the year 732. They were stopped by a military led by a Frankish king, and Frankish like an ethnic group that we could consider Germanic. And that king's name was Charles Martel, who had the nickname Charles the Hammer, which is such a great nickname, because he was known as such an amazing general. And so this is a really significant battle because if the Franks had not won, history would look very different. The Umayyads probably would have successfully pushed further into Europe, but instead the Franks were able to push the Umayyads into Spain and keep them there for the remainder of their history until the year 1492. So the kind of cultural significance of this is that because the Franks beat the Umayyads, it helps Europe remain Christian. And when we talk more about medieval Europe, we will see that the lineage that comes from Charles Martel are known as the Carolingians. And the Carolingians are very responsible for affirming Christianity in Europe. So this is a big old what if in history, right? If the Umayyads had won, Europe might have been Muslim, and that would have really changed the course of history. So this is, I think, this Rubens painting of the Umayyads clashing with the Carolingians here. And I show this to you mostly because I like this meme that's referencing Charles Martel, or Charles the Hammer. So stop, hammer time. Anyway. All right, so let's talk about Umayyad policy, because even though they are very successful militaristically, they were not very popular as rulers. And they were not very popular because they did not treat their conquered people very well. They were extremely exclusive and did not allow local people who were not like them to have much power at all. They only allowed ethnic Arabs who were Sunni Muslims and who were rich to have any power whatsoever. So as they were conquering people, if those people didn't fall into that category, they lost all power, which isn't, a very popular thing. Here we can see a conquered person offering tribute to an Umayyad Caliph, and most likely if that person, like I said, did not fall into that category of ethnicity and religion, they would not be able to maintain their power. Also, the Umayyad did not foster a sense of religious and cultural tolerance. They are conquering a lot of people who are not Muslim, who are not Arab, and over time, the people who don't feel that sense of tolerance will rise up against the Umayyad. So a little bit more detail about that. A term that's very important to understand in the context of any of these Islamic empires is the term dhimmi. Dhimmi means people of the book. And the book that's being referred to in this phrase is the Old Testament. So what this term is referring to is the concept of Abrahamic faiths, and that all people of Abrahamic faiths believe in the Old Testament, right? Or like the Torah and the early books of the Bible. So by using the term dhimmi, they are referring to Jews and Christians. And the belief, it's even written in the Quran, is that all Jews and Christians should be protected by Muslims. And over time in various Muslim governments, we will see some governments do a very good job of protecting the dhimmi. But the Umayyad were not particularly good at protecting the dhimmi. They were very much out for themselves. So even though they were supposed to, the dhimmi often experienced discrimination under the Umayyad. Another way in which the conquered people were not always treated very well was based on the poll tax, which was called the jizya. So essentially, this tax allowed people to continue to practice their faith. And tradition set that tax at a pretty reasonable rate, closer to 3%. And the idea of waging this tax is that by paying this tax, not only could people continue to practice their faith, but also it would exempt them from military service. So they wouldn't have to fight for the Umayyad, or in any other instance where there's an Islamic government, it helped exempt those conquered people from military service. And it kept it close to 3% to align it with the charity tax that Muslims pay, which is usually around 2.5%. But the problem with the Umayyad is that sometimes they inflated that percentage and forced people to pay up to 20% of their wealth in the jizya, and obviously people got pretty angry at that. So a combination of these things, and sometimes violence towards conquered peoples, really angered people and made them not appreciate living under Umayyad rule. So this map is pretty important, and it's a modern day map. But I want to show you this map so that we can understand just how diverse the Middle East is. So this is just looking at the Middle East. This isn't even looking at parts of North Africa and other parts of the Asian territories that the Umayyads pushed into. So we're not going to go over all of these affiliations, but what I'm trying to show you here is that the Arab ethnic group is not a clear majority throughout this region. So there are many different ethnic groups that are shown in these colors here. So yellow is showing the Arab ethnic group. So that means that all the other colors are different ethnic groups. And even though this is a modern map, it still pretty much aligns with the concentration of ethnic groups back during the Umayyad era. So just a couple ones to point out to you. In green, we see the Turkish ethnic group. In this maroonish color are the Kurdish ethnic group. When we get into Iran, in this bright orange is the Persian ethnic group. And over in Afghanistan, we see a lot of different colors going on because Afghanistan is very ethnically diverse. The biggest ethnic group is the Pashtun ethnic group, which is in this brown color here. So the point of this is it's showing you how many people would not have had access to power during the Umayyad Empire. So no wonder people did not appreciate their rule and began to rebel against them. So the Umayyad fall in less than 100 years, which is pretty short, all things considered, like they're very powerful. And they fall because a military leader named Abu al-Abbas created a coalition of non-Arab forces as well as Shia Muslims and other people of different religions. And they banded together because they were so tired of what they saw as dictatorial Umayyad rule. They worked together and overthrew the Umayyads and helped to establish the Abbasid Empire. So the Abbasid Empire lasts from 750 to 1258, and they expand further into Asia. They technically lose Spain, but I'm going to talk about how Spain still remains under Muslim leadership. So the Abbasid Empire was founded by Abu al-Abbas, as I said. They build a new capital city in what we know as Baghdad today. And after the initial war for conquering and expansion and overthrowing the Umayyad, Pax Islamica is established. And just as a reminder, the term Pax means peace. So this means that they ruled over an age of peace from 750 to 1050. And because of all this peace and the prosperity of the time period, there is this cultural golden age. And we're going to look at a lot of the art and the math and science that comes out of this era because it is really influential. Also, this is a portrait of Abu al-Abbas, who looks like kind of sweet here. Another key caliph that's important to know is Harun al-Rashid. Harun al-Rashid, who succeeds Abu al-Abbas, makes a historic peace with the Carolingians in Central Europe. The Carolingians are the family that descends from Charles the Hammer. So after years of fighting with this European group, the Abbasid create peace, which is both good for the Europeans as well as the Abbasid, because then they no longer have to spend all their time and money fighting each other. They lay down arms, they create a peace, and it allows for everyone to kind of focus on their own governments. And both Europe and the Islamic Empire go through their own golden age as a result. The Abbasid are known for far better policies of tolerance towards their different ethnic groups, right? Which of course is what helps to create the peace. So this is just a painting of the meeting between Harun al-Rashid and Charlemagne in the creation of the peace treaty between the Central Europeans and the Abbasid Empire. Every year, they would renew their treaty to make sure that they wouldn't go to war with one another. And when they did that, they would bring presents. And just a quick story, because I really like this one. Every year, they would exchange gifts of goodwill. And one year, after Charlemagne had gifted Harun al-Rashid this mechanical clock, which was like considered really luxurious and incredible for the time, Harun al-Rashid wanted to like one-up Charlemagne, and so he gave him an elephant. And this is an illustration of the elephant who traveled from, initially this elephant was from India. So this elephant, in its lifetime, walked from India to Baghdad, and then from Baghdad to Aachen, Germany, which is kind of crazy to think about. And he, arrived in this like amazing kind of Prince Ali-esque caravan. Charlemagne loved him so much, and he named him Abu al-Abbas after the founder of the Abbasid Empire. And yeah, there's a lot of kind of stories and mythologies around all of this. But I thought that was like a sweet story and an example and a reminder that peace has to be created, right, and forged through diplomacy. And they were able to do that in the Abbasid Empire. So, a couple other notes about the expansion and the territorial changes of the Abbasid Empire. First, as I said, the Abbasid Empire loses the Spanish territories that the Umayyad had. And this area of Spain becomes known as Al-Andalus, and it becomes an independent caliphate. And we're going to talk a tiny bit about that at the end of this. The Abbasid do push further into Asia, and they clash with the Tang dynasty. And we took a quick look at this before when we learned about the Tang dynasty. The Abbasid and the Chinese clash at what's called the Battle of Talis in the year 751. And this is a very important moment because originally the Abbasid win and take over that region. But hopefully you remember that, and I talked about this in the context of China. Yes, this is a moment of conflict, but the effect of this is a lot of cultural exchange and cultural diffusion. That the Abbasid learned a lot about paper making and printing from the Chinese, and in exchange, the Chinese learned a lot about math and medicine from the Abbasid. So both cultures ended up getting new information as a result of this military conflict. Also, this explains why Central Asia and Western China, such as the Uyghur people, practice Islam because of this expansion into Central Asia and Western China. So during the Abbasid Empire, we do see mass conversion to Islam throughout the region. And there's lots of reason for this. One is definitely that the Abbasid were far more tolerant, and so there's just like a sense of peace. And just, when there's less violence, people are more willing to listen to new ideas. But there are a couple of very practical reasons why people began to convert to Islam. One of those has to do with the trade provisions that are talked about in the Quran. The Quran says that it is a sin for a Muslim to cheat anyone in trade. So because of this, Muslims became very famous merchants, and people wanted to do business with Muslim merchants. Because of this, if you were not a Muslim, but you were a merchant, many merchants began to convert to Islam in order to get business. So initially, that might mean that someone isn't converting out of faith, so they're not a very faithful person. You might say they're not a true Muslim. However, they will raise their children and their families in general in Islam, so maybe that first convert is not a true Muslim, but their children will be raised with the faith and they will have a kind of stronger sense of that faith. So just in general, merchants traveling around helped to spread the faith, but also this trade provision inspired some people to convert. Another way that trade helped to expand Islam has to do with the Arabic language. So the Quran is originally printed and spoken in Arabic because that was the native language of Muhammad and the first converts. It was Islamic tradition that the Quran could only be printed and spoken in Arabic. So even if your native language was, let's say, Persian or Turkish, you would learn Arabic so that you could practice Islam. So this means that Arabic creates a sense of unity throughout the whole empire because everybody's learning some bit of Arabic. So that means that if you wanted to do business, you would want to know some Arabic, right? It becomes what's called a lingua franca, or a common language. And the best way to learn Arabic would be to go to mosque or to go to what's called a madrasa, which we'll learn about in a second, which are these Islamic schools. So even if you only went for the purposes of learning the language, you would inherently learn about the religion, which would pique some people's curiosity and often cause them to convert to the faith. Another way in which people began to convert that's more out of like kind of pragmatic reasons has to do with slavery. So there was a slave trade during this time period. I want to mention that it was not race-based. There were a lot of people who were enslaved throughout not just the Abbasid Empire, but throughout the world. There was another passage in the Quran that says that it is a sin for a Muslim to enslave another Muslim. So, in parts of Eastern Europe and in parts of Eastern Africa, where some Arab merchants were buying individuals to sell into slave markets, When people learned about this clause in the Quran, they converted to Islam so that Muslim merchants would not buy and sell them. So this explains why in parts of um, like Eastern Europe, like in places like Chechnya and all the way through some parts of Central Asia, why some people began to convert. And it also explains why parts of Eastern Africa, like Somalia and Tanzania, today have high rates of Islam because many people began to convert for this purpose and also because they were interacting with Muslim merchants. This image here is from an Abbasid era history book, which is showing an East African slave market. But again, I want to highlight that slavery had nothing to do with race in this era. Slave traders purchased people from the Mediterranean, from Central Asia, from Africa. It is not a race-based system. That doesn't happen until the transatlantic slave trade. Some more notes on the Abbasid administration or the government. So there were two legal systems in the Abbasid administration. They did have Sharia law for Muslims, and we'll remember that Sharia law is Muslim law. But they did not impose Sharia law on non-Muslims. There was a separate secular or non-religious legal system that applied to the empire at large. So they did not enforce Muslim law on non-Muslim people. They did heavily invest in education and a lot of public services. So they opened up a series of what are called madrasas, which are Islamic schools. So the primary focus of madrasas is to teach about Islam. However, over time, they began to offer interdisciplinary education. So down here, we can see individuals, and they're working with a lot of kind of mathematical devices here and astrolabes and compasses and stuff like that. So they did begin to move into the maths and sciences and literature as well. Madrasas were open to anyone who wanted to come. So even though the majority of people did go to study Islam, some people went to also get other types of education. And again, it was all paid for by the government. Eventually, these evolved into universities, and the first university in the world was established in Cairo, known as the Al-Azhar University, which is this building right here, this domed building. It's the first university that offered degrees, and initially they were all in religious studies, but over time it included lots of other subjects as well. And again, all of this paid for by the government, by taxes, and by that charity tax that paid for by Muslims. A really important example of another, I won't call it a university, it's kind of like a university, it was kind of like a library and just general resource center, was known as the Baghdad House of Wisdom, which is still standing today. It's mostly a museum, but we can see it right here at the bottom. And here are individuals who are gathered. You can see all the books in the back, and they're all hanging out and studying. So it's a massive library and university that was founded by Harun al-Rashid, who is the same caliph who established peace with the Central Europeans. There's a lot going on with the House of Wisdom, so I'm just going to mention a couple things. The Baghdad House of Wisdom was a center for what's called the translation movement. And this movement, the whole goal of it was to go out into the world. So Harun al-Rashid and other caliphs sent scholars throughout the world to collect texts so that they could translate them into Arabic and to make sure that no major books in the world disappeared. They wanted to copy as many books as possible to preserve their information. They particularly loved Greek culture. They loved Aristotle, they loved Plato and Socrates, so they wanted to translate as many Greek texts into Arabic because a lot of Greek texts had been lost in many attacks and fires throughout history. Intellectuals in this school also produced a lot of amazing scientific work in medicine, mathematics, astronomy, logic, and engineering. And we're going to look at this a little further when we look at the science and art of the Islamic Golden Age. Other public services that were offered by the Abbasid include health services. The Abbasid opened up a series of hospitals that were free to everybody. Anybody who needed medical help could come to these hospitals and receive help. It's important to note that these hospitals are also the first hospitals regardless of whether or not they were free. Usually what happened is in kind of the ancient and classical world is that if you got sick, doctors came to your home. But Abbasid medical experts recognized that that wasn't a safe thing to do because people's homes were not always very clean. So if you needed to do some type of surgery or wound cleaning, if your home wasn't like super hygienic, then that was going to be a problem. So these hospitals are revolutionary for so many reasons. First, because they were free to anybody who needed them. Second, because they also included teaching hospitals. There were wards where up and coming doctors would be able to learn the practice. And they kept them as hygienic as possible to make sure that when they provided services and surgeries, that they would be free of infection and be really, really safe. They also established pharmacies, which is what's being shown here, where people would go with prescriptions, give them to a pharmacist, and receive the medicine that they wanted. Again, all of this free, paid for by the government. Other economic reforms coming from the Abbasid Empire helped to promote more trade. Kind of one of the big things is that the Abbasid wanted to make it as easy as possible for people to thrive economically. And because there are multiple currencies that were used throughout the Abbasid Empire, what they did was they tried to centralize the economy by creating a banking system. So they create the first centralized banking system. So a series of these centralized banks were found throughout the empire. They utilized a gold standard to back their economy to try to stabilize the economy. And they were the first to issue what we know as checks today. The term they use is the sok, and they worked just like checks work today, that you deposit your money in one bank, but you can carry a certified check from that bank so that you can withdraw money at a different bank in a different part of the empire. The point of this was to make it as easy as possible to do a lot of transactions for luxury trade, and also to make it harder to be robbed, because if people were carrying like trunks of gold or trunks of currency and they got ambushed by bandits, then they would lose everything, and that didn't instill a lot of confidence in the trade. So by creating a banking system in the checks, it instilled confidence, and people began to trade more widely. This is looking at what's called a bazaar, which are the earliest like malls in which people conducted a lot of trade, and where people, like the merchants, would sleep on the bottom floor and whatnot. So a lot of trade activity happening. So the Abbasid fall over a period of years. So starting around the year 1050, they started to be invaded by a group of Turks called the Seljuk Turks. And to try to make peace with the Seljuk Turks, the Abbasid hired them as mercenary armies. But by doing so, they really empowered the Seljuk Turks, so they kept acting up. So slowly over time, this decentralizes the empire. And then also later on, people break with the tradition of only printing the Quran in Arabic, and they begin to print the Quran in their own languages. So now all the unity has been lost. The Abbasid Empire finally ends in the year 1258 when the Mongols come in and sack the city of Baghdad, right? So then it's all done. So I do want to take a couple minutes to talk about what is going on in Spain. Spain is lost as a territory by the Abbasid, but instead they become their own independent caliphate known as Al-Andalus. And Al-Andalus reigns from 750 to about 1100. It kind of just slowly loses territory over time. So again, it becomes its own independent caliphate, and they maintain a really good relationship with the Abbasid. And their political and cultural legacy is one of a high tolerance and a very multicultural society. They did an excellent job at protecting the dhimmi, such that Jews from around Europe and North Africa migrated to Al-Andalusian Spain because they knew that the caliphs would protect them very much. So they have their own golden age of science, art, and interfaith cooperation. So here in this picture, you can see how multicultural this area of Spain is. Often the Andalusian kings are known as the Moors of Spain. You might have heard that maybe in English classes and in Shakespeare. So this is in the capital of Al-Andalusia called Cordoba, and you can see a lot of Islamic architecture here. So if we were really to kind of go around and look, we'd see people of a lot of different ethnic backgrounds, a lot of different religious backgrounds, because Al-Andalus did promote a atmosphere of tolerance. In this picture, I love this picture because there's so much going on here. But in this picture, we can see a Christian and a Muslim playing chess. And chess is an invention of the Muslims. So here we can see people hanging out and kind of peacefully playing this Islamic game. In Spain at this time, dhimmi were permitted their own legal system and social services. So it's almost like they lived independently, yet were protected by the Andalusian kings or caliphs. Jewish intellectuals thrived in southern Spain at this time. They worked on so many different topics, from medicine to Jewish religious scholarship to architecture. They built a bunch of schools and synagogues. And this is an image of a Jewish cantor, we can see up here, reading the Passover story. And this is in a 14th century Spanish like Jewish history book. Right, so for this period of time, Jews, Muslims, and Christians were getting along famously in southern Spain. A little bit on the Arabic effects on Spanish culture. So the architecture, the language in southern Spain has a lot to do with Arab culture. So we're going to learn more about the specifics of Arabic architecture, but just to get a glimpse here, Arabic architecture is all about symmetry. It's all about repeating geometric patterns. And the best example of this, I think, is what's called the Alhambra, which is in Granada, Spain. The Alhambra is a fortress and a palace, and so beautiful. This is one of the many courtyards, and we can see that idea of symmetry, right? This perfect symmetry right down here, and even the reflecting pole is reflecting a sense of like symmetry. This is the view from like across the way of the Alhambra, so you can see just how kind of like incredible this building is. This is one of the gardens. I don't know who this person is. I stole this from the internet. If you're a fan of Game of Thrones, you might know this because all the palace scenes from the Dornish kingdoms were shot in the Alhambra. So with all these beautiful, again, a lot of geometric shapes in their gardens as well as in like their building structures themselves. You can see in this one wall the geometric repeating patterns, which is a classic form of Islamic architecture. Another example is what's called the Mezquita, or the Little Mosque in Cordoba, where again we can see a lot of repeating patterns. It's as if in certain parts of this mosque, when you look, it's like it goes on for infinity. And that's like a purposeful architectural feature of La Mezquita. And the last thing that I'll say is that Arabic has a huge influence on the Spanish language, specifically Castilian Spanish, which is the type of Spanish that you learn in school. About 40% of Castilian Spanish words are derived from Arabic, right? That is no small percentage. Many of the words that begin with al, like alcalde, albanil, which means mayor and mansion, are Arabic descended words. Al is a big prefix in the Arabic language. Other words, just because I threw them in here, like asesino and ajedrez, are also Arabic descended, right? And there are a bunch more. Most Spanish students know that the term ojalá is a direct Arabic phrase, an Islamic phrase, which means oh Allah. And it's a term in Spanish that's meant to mean hopefully. So it's literally like, I hope to God, ojalá. So just kind of a smattering of examples. But the big thing is that 40% of these Castilian Spanish words are derived from Arabic. All right, I will wrap this up here. Thank you for your attention.